about the very significant link between inflammatory bowel disease and multiple sclerosis, and how this research is yet more evidence that multiple sclerosis is caused by a parasitic infestation. And treating the parasites, we can recover from multiple sclerosis. If we haven't met, my name is Pam Bartha. I'm the author of Become a Wellness Champion and the founder of Live Disease Free. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis over 35 years ago. By the grace of God, I learned early on that the MS was caused by infections. I didn't know all the infections involved, but definitely over the years, we've learned a lot. And so today we're going to be adding another huge piece to this puzzle of really understanding what causes MS, because when we know the cause of multiple sclerosis, then we can actually be cured from it. We can actually recover from MS. And that's really the direction that our research needs to go. It needs to follow the trail of clues. So this is a really, really big piece of the puzzle here that we're going to talk about today. And the evidence that linking multiple sclerosis with inflammatory bowel disease and just bowel issues in general, it's been really growing over the last few years. And the first evidence was found in the early 1980s when they discovered that in multiple sclerosis patients, especially in women in the UK, and they noticed that there was a higher incidence of MS patients in women that had had the operation of a colonectomy, which they were dealing with colitis, ulcerative colitis, or Crohn's disease, and this was in the United Kingdom. And then just this year, in 2024, in the month March of 2024, a study that was published, and the title of the study is Inflammatory Bowel Disease Associated with an Increase in the Incidence of Multiple Sclerosis. So this was a study where they looked back at least like almost 25,000 people. This is a German study, so people that were in Germany. And they looked at, again, 24,934 individuals with inflammatory bowel disease. And so about half of them had Crohn's disease. The other half had ulcerative colitis, as well as they compared this to almost 25,000 people. They matched them. Then they did not have inflammatory bowel disease, and they followed them for 10 years. And they found that the people that had inflammatory bowel disease, they later on went on to develop multiple sclerosis at a much higher incidence than people that did not have inflammatory bowel disease. So that included Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. So the researchers also found that the association between the Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis and multiple sclerosis, it was more pronounced with male patients, male MS patients, which is interesting because I believe that there's a higher incidence in general of MS in females. But when it had to do with people that had inflammatory bowel disease first and then went on to develop MS, there was a higher incidence in males. So the conclusions that they shared is that their analysis suggests a remarkable association between inflammatory bowel disease and later or subsequent multiple sclerosis diagnosis. These findings warrant further investigation, of course. And then a 2023 study that I found, it's called Multiple Sclerosis and Ulcerative Colitis. It is a systematic review. They looked at the literature, they did a meta-analysis, and they found when they did their comprehensive literature search, they did perform investigation looking at the association between inflammatory bowel disease, of ulcerative colitis, not Crohn's, and MS. They found, again, that their findings highlighted that the presence of ulcerative colitis increases the risk of developing multiple sclerosis by more than 50%. That's huge. Whereas the presence of MS, so if somebody was diagnosed with MS, for them to later come down with ulcerative colitis, they were not able to pick up that association. So a person that had ulcerative colitis, they had over a 50% higher risk of developing MS later on, whereas people that had MS, they did not have an increased risk of developing ulcerative colitis later. So very, very interesting. They shared that these results underscore the importance of considering the potential development of ulcerative colitis in a clinical management and early diagnosis of MS of patients with multiple sclerosis. So, it's really frustrating because they're just like, oh, well, we've really got to, pay attention to this because we might have to treat ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, either one of those, and multiple sclerosis, and not just MS or not just inflammatory bowel disease, when in fact they should be going, why are they linked so closely together? Why is it that if you have ulcerative colitis, you have over a 50% greater risk of being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis later? That's really, really significant. So the inflammatory bowel disease, again, includes both looking at colitis, ulcerative colitis, and Crohn's disease, and the prevalence of both of these inflammatory bowel diseases. It is on the rise in the world. Like more and more people are developing inflammatory bowel disease, and it does affect male and females. So another thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is that and I've shared this before in one of my previous events, talking about how years before we're diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, we've had gut issues, we've had bowel issues, either constipation, diarrhea, gas, pain, bloating, stomach aches, and it can be incontinence too, fecal incontinence. So I want you guys I know this is a sensitive topic, but if you want to share, it just helps us all to understand how many of us really have had these issues. So for myself, I had a childhood of stomach aches and a lot of constipation. I would have a bowel movement once a week when I was really young. And I didn't know any different. I didn't know that it was bad to have a bowel movement once a week. There were 6 kids, and I don't even know if our mom checked our stool. It wasn't something you really talked about. But I do know that every time, which wasn't very often, like if our family would get a hamburger or pizza or something like that, because this was many years ago and we didn't eat out very much because we were on the farm in a very rural area. We didn't go to the restaurants very often. But if I ate something like a hamburger, I would be laying on the ground in pain. Or if I ate pizza or something like that. So I do remember stomach aches. I do remember a lot of constipation. I never had diarrhea, but some people do. Some people have more diarrhea. Sometimes they have alternating. I never had incontinence, but again, that's usually comes a little later if you don't deal with the inflammatory bowel disease part of it, if you're not able to manage it well enough. And so for me, it was way more than 5 years, because I remember probably before the age of 10 that I had gut issues. I had my appendix removed when I was 12 years old because I had all these stomach aches. And then the doctor removed my appendix and he said, oh, your appendix was fine. So I had, and it's not just Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, but it can be irritable bowel disease. So another study in 2000, just want to make sure that this is the right one. Let's see here. Let me just go over this one study here first. So neurogenic bowel dysfunction, and they're talking about 2 to 5 years before the onset or after the onset of multiple sclerosis. So some of the studies, when you do some research, you'll notice that they're talking about 2 to 5 years after the onset of MS, they're finding that The bowel problems include gas. About 30% of people with MS have gas, and also about 30% have constipation, and about 16% have diarrhea of MS patients, and also the fecal incontinence, where you're not able to hold your stool, is about 12%. And so this is 2 to 5 years after we're diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. But then there's also other studies, and I've shared them before, of all of the symptoms of the bowel issues before diagnosis of MS, and it can be up to 5 years before that they've been studying this. So again, for myself and for many of us, you can share with yourself, like if this was you, before you had MS, did you have bowel issues? Any kind of constipation, bloating, gas, any of that? So a 2019 study, bowel symptoms predate the diagnosis of many patients with multiple sclerosis. So that was my experience also. This was a 14-year cohort study. So over 14 years, they looked at a lot of people that had they followed a group of people. Among almost 400 MS patients with reported bowel syndrome or symptoms, they had these bowel symptoms before they had their clinically isolated symptom. So remember that with MS, a lot of times we have this first initial attack, and so all of these bowel symptoms were before that for these people. Again, the most common symptoms, constipation, and the second most common was diarrhea. And the average lead time between the first bowel symptom and that first MS attack was about 3.7 years. So 3.7 years before they were diagnosed with MS, they started to have these bowel issues. So very, very interesting. And then nearly a third of MS patients with bowel symptoms reported bowel symptoms prior to the myelating event. So that's about 30% of people reported that they had bowel issues before they had a first MS attack. In 2017 study, multiple sclerosis and inflammatory bowel diseases, a systematic review and meta-analysis. And so again, here both the inflammatory bowel disease and multiple sclerosis seem to have a 50% increased risk of MS or inflammatory bowel disease comorbidity, respectively, with no apparent differences between ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. So remember, I shared a different study where they were finding that, when you had ulcerative colitis, you had a much higher risk, like 50% increased risk of developing MS. But this other study, a 2017 study, it said, well, it didn't really matter if it was ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. Both of them equally played a part in comorbidities, and that means what we die from, multiple sclerosis and inflammatory bowel disease. So there's a really huge link between MS and bowel disease. And I know that in one of the studies I was looking at, they're like, well, it's just, there's this inflammation in your central nervous system, in your brain, and that's what's causing the bowel issues. And I'm like, oh, really? And that causes gas too? Like, by definition, they know that gas is caused by fermentation, where bacteria and other parasites are fermenting carbohydrates. So how does a lesion in your central nervous system cause gas? Like, no, right? Absolutely not. So it's just awful. Again, the more you go into this, the more awful it is. So some of the common bowel issues that are associated with multiple sclerosis, constipation is number one. Number two would be diarrhea. Number three would be fecal incontinence, irritable bowel disease, IBS. So sometimes it's called spastic colon, and IBS is the name for several different conditions. Maybe we have alternating constipation and diarrhea. Maybe we're constipated for a few days and then we have diarrhea. And other symptoms could also include gas, pains, and abdominal cramps. And we think that a lot of it has to do with just celiac or being sensitive to gluten. And yes, we can definitely be sensitive to gluten and we should avoid it if we are sensitive to it. But it's caused by parasites for sure. But scientists don't understand IBS or its causes. It's so sad because it's so easy to understand. It's such common sense. Why? Because, like, on the one hand, they're like, we don't know what's causing the diarrhea and the constipation and the gas and the stomach pain, but we do know that parasites cause all those symptoms. But it couldn't be parasites because these people, their water is filtered, so they're not going to be exposed to parasites. They haven't traveled to other countries, so they're not going to be exposed to parasites. And it's like, well, there's parasites all around us. Like if we're working in the soil, if we're gardening, if we have pets, if we're buying produce, if we're eating in restaurants, right? Parasites are just part of life. But for some reason, there's this disconnect. So this is interesting. Some research has found that about 20% of people diagnosed with multiple sclerosis have symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome. And that's more than twice. So that's more than two times higher than the general population, than the overall population. And again, common symptoms of parasites in the digestive tract would be abdominal pain, diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, gas or bloating, loose stools containing blood and mucus, rashes, itching, especially in the rectum area or even in the vulva, pain, stomach pain and tenderness, feeling tired, and weight loss. So those are just common symptoms of parasites in the digestive tract, and those are common symptoms of inflammatory bowel disease and irritable bowel disease, and that is really, really significantly higher in people that have multiple sclerosis. So this really helps us to understand what we're dealing with. So if you guys want to type in any questions, if you want to share your experience, maybe you've had gut issues, you've had stomach issues, constipation is the most common in our students, but it's so important that we get this information out. It's like glaring evidence that multiple sclerosis is an infectious disease caused by a parasitic infestation inside. It starts in our gut. And if we would treat it early, if we could go to our doctors and say, I've been having a lot of constipation, and when I eat the wrong foods, I get gas and I get stomach pain, and I've noticed I'm not sleeping as well, and I notice that I'm waking up throughout the night, I'm more tired than normal, and then your doctor would say to you, oh, that sounds like you're dealing with parasites. Let's do a stool test. Unfortunately, we don't have good stool tests right now, but maybe he could just do what we're doing and just do like symptoms, do some energy testing and say, okay, well, I want you to go on a round of roundworm medication, or I want you're looking like you may have a tapeworm, etc. And if we would treat everyone early, whether it's like early on with herbs and or oxygen therapies and or parasite drugs, we would not have all of these massive, like multi-billion, hundreds of billions of dollars. And actually, in the whole grand scheme of things, it's trillions of dollars is our healthcare system right now. We wouldn't have all these industries. We would not need all these specialists. Our doctors, if they were just a general practitioner and they helped us treat parasites early, then those parasites would not end up in the central nervous system. We would not need neurologists. We would not end up with cancer. We would not need oncologists. We would, obviously, we'd have parasites in our digestive tract, so we could use a gastroenterologist or just a GP. We wouldn't need the specialists for that. We wouldn't need infectious disease doctors. I mean, there's no harm in having a doctor that's really skilled at identifying different types of parasites, kind of like well, you have these symptoms and that, I've seen this before, and like it looks like you have this type of parasite, because we don't have good stool tests at this time. And I don't know how easy it would be to get a good stool test, because I know that they're picking up about 10% of the parasites that we have. And the problem is when you do a DNA test, they're taking such a small sample that it's really easy for them to miss the DNA of the parasite. And are they testing all the parasites? Are they testing all the different types of parasites that we could have? So this is the dilemma, is that our doctors, number one, don't believe we could have parasites. They have not been trained to identify parasites. They don't know how to identify, like even just with symptoms, they don't have good tests. So this is why we have parasites for years, like I did. I was always skinny. My mom was trying to fatten me up by giving me ice cream, giving my brothers and sisters ice cream. They all put weight on. I didn't. I had the stomach aches. I was on a lot of antibiotics for acne for years. My other siblings were not. And maybe that was the big factor that really made me more susceptible to a parasitic infestation. But whatever the case is, I was the one that had, again, my appendix removed, years of constipation, years of stomach aches. Let me know if you had anything similar to that at any point in your life years before you were diagnosed, not just with MS, but with other chronic diseases also, because it's really neat if you share, because then other people will be reading the feed and they'll go, oh, that was me. That was me. It's not like, look at all these people and they all had it too. So that really confirms the research that I'm sharing with you. And so I know that I was sharing that our doctors, they're not really going to help us, unfortunately. There are some doctors, there's a lot more doctors and practitioners, integrated practitioners that are wanting to help us. They're open to helping us, but they just lack the skill. So some of them will have more skill with candida, or maybe with some of the vector-borne infections associated with Lyme disease. But as far as the roundworms and tapeworms and flukes and filarial worms and all of the flat and roundworms, they don't have a lot of experience with the different parasite drugs, etc. So we can help you with that. Number one, we have a proven plan. You can actually watch my masterclass training, which talks about all the steps that we take to recover from these parasites that cause all of these awful symptoms, and they cause the gut issues. And so we not only heal our digestion, like people have shared, like, this is the first time I've ever had normal bowel movements, right? And this is not just the bowels, but they also get into the kidneys and into the bladder. So as you treat the parasites, then you won't have the urgency also. So really important to decrease the food to the parasites. They love carbohydrates and simple sugar. So following the Live Disease-Free diet is really important. And then that is all listed on our website under research. On the main menu under research, you'll find the guidelines there. So start with that. And then we support the body. We get the bowels moving. We have to use a supplement to get our bowels moving. We're sleeping, we're using a supplement to help us sleep. And just checking off the checklist for healing, making sure we're supporting the body. So when we do all these steps, we're feeling a lot better already. Then we start to treat, and we use a combination of parasite drugs, herbs, and oxygen therapies to treat the parasites, because just one on its own is not enough. And so when we go through a few treatment cycles, we notice that with each treatment cycle, our stomach becomes more quiet, and there's no pain, and the gas goes away. And then we notice that our neurological symptoms also are decreasing, especially during the prep phase and then while we're treating. And it is possible to recover. We have a lot of students. We actually had another student today, or yesterday, I should say, because we had our call yesterday, who reported that she doesn't have symptoms right now. So that's really exciting, that she's basically virtually symptom-free. So, and then there's a whole bunch of other students that are either, number one, they're in the prep phase, or number two, they are treating and they're feeling a lot better. But it takes multiple treatment cycles, especially when we've been diagnosed with a specific type of disease. So I'll go to your questions right now. Hello, Ricky. limited data on your smartphone, just listening for a few minutes. Correct. As you recall, you were experiencing bowel problems in 2012, 2013, and onward, and you were diagnosed in 2016. Interesting, right? And that is a huge clue as to what is causing the multiple sclerosis. So you were on a specific protocol that helped your bowel issues, probably due to the cessation of inflammatory foods. Well, I know that Dr. Terry Wahls, her diet is paleo, so you're getting rid of gluten, and I believe you're not having dairy, so you're really decreasing your carbs a lot. Again, that is their favorite food of the parasites. So as you're decreasing the food to the parasites, you're going to notice a lot of symptom improvements. But I can guarantee you that if you start eating those foods again, you're not going to feel well again. You'll have those gut issues. So that is the thing that we have to do, is we have to also treat the parasites. Otherwise, if we eat the wrong foods, then they will be more active and we will have more issues. And so you said you were using tinctures and that was helping to improve your symptoms and you were feeling better. And so I assume that those tinctures are herbal tinctures, like antimicrobial tinctures, and that's awesome. So before we knew about the parasite drugs, we just relied on herbs and oxygen therapies, but we have found that the parasite drugs are definitely really, really helpful. That especially for people that have had MS and other chronic diseases longer, that have more disability, that have a deeper infestation, adding in the parasite drugs really helps. And it's really important that we do enough treatment cycles so that we're virtually symptom-free. Michael, you took a dewormer and the gas isn't an issue anymore. Yes. And it's not just bacteria that causes fermentation. So when you have any kind of microbe that is breaking down carbohydrates, they produce gas. So it could be worms, but it could be bacteria. Probably protists also can produce gas. Jada, yes, many years of antibiotics, bowel issues, but you had a different diagnosis. All autoimmune disease, including, and cancer is not autoimmune, but autoimmune disease, cancer, heart disease, they're all infectious diseases, all of them, caused by parasites. Deb, you were on multiple rounds of antibiotics as a child, and then also as a young adult, and you've had constipation issues for years. So let me ask you this question. So if this is like, it's not just one study, it's many studies that are really pointing to the link between like bowel disease and multiple sclerosis. So if there is such a strong link between bowel disease and multiple sclerosis, then why is the panel that has created the McDonald 2017 criteria of how we diagnose and treat MS, why are they not interested in this? Why are they not interested in possible infections that could cause multiple sclerosis? Why? Why are they just narrowly focused on lesions and bands of antibodies in the central nervous system? And they're like, no, there's no value in looking to see what types of infections could be involved or why there is such a strong link between inflammatory bowel disease and multiple sclerosis. Well, if you go to the last 2 pages of the McDonald criteria, and I've shared that on one of the events, you will see that they are heavily funded by the drug companies that sell the immunosuppressive, disease-modifying maintenance drugs that we're supposed to take forever. And they don't want to give up those profits. So that's what's influencing how we're diagnosing and how we are treating multiple sclerosis. So the problem is if you stick with that system and you know that they're not looking for a cure, that they're not interested in what's really causing MS, they just want to they've got a good gig going on right now. And if they want to just continue with that and you continue to support that, you know what you're going to get, right? You're going to get a life of a lot of misery and suffering and progression. Like even on these disease modifying immunosuppressive drugs, the multiple sclerosis will continue to progress. We will move from relapsing remitting to progressive multiple sclerosis because they're not interested in finding a cure. They're interested in selling these very expensive disease modifying drugs, which can cost $100,000 to $200,000 per year. And so and I know that it's a hard pill to swallow. It really, really is. It's taken me years to have the courage to talk like this. And I'm not against our doctors. If you've gone to school for 10 years and you've been told, you're the expert, there are no other experts, you're the expert, this is the only thing that works, look at all the research that we have, there's nothing else that works, and you really believe that you're the expert and you really believe that there is nothing else, then that's what you're going to follow. You're going to follow that. And that's where we're at right now. We're stuck. We're so gridlocked. And people are suffering terribly. People are becoming disabled. People are dying early. People are not living their life. And it's so common sense. It is such a common sense approach. Like, when you see like, oh my gosh, yeah, Pam, I've had all these gut issues for years. And yeah, it totally makes sense that parasites cause these symptoms. It's like on the medical websites, like, I'm not even saying the names because I don't want to get red flagged, but if you just do searches, you'll see all these big medical centers and they're like, yeah, these are symptoms of parasites and these are symptoms of inflammatory bowel disease. But we're not going to connect the two. Not at all. We're going to keep it separate. We want to keep it that inflammatory bowel disease is just like an autoimmune. Your immune system is attacking your intestines for no reason. Does that make sense to you? Does it make sense to you? No, it doesn't. So you can either keep doing the same thing over and over again, and I think that's the definition of insanity, is when you do the same thing expecting a different result and you keep getting the same horrible result. Or you can decide to say, okay, enough of that. I've given them years. I've been on these drugs for years. I've progressed. They're not working for me. I'm really concerned about the adverse effects. And then you can take a different path like I did. And I thank God that he shared. And I did ask a lot. I did ask for a lot of help, and he did answer my prayers. And I didn't have all the answers, and I still don't have all the answers, but we have a lot of answers. We have enough answers that we can treat and we can recover. And it still takes a few treatment cycles, but we can. So we have a lot of wisdom, I believe, from God, knowing many of the common types of parasites that are involved with multiple sclerosis, but with other diseases also. So Ricky found that black walnut and wormwood and cloves and stevia were helpful. And let's see. So he did that for 8 weeks, no side effects. So those herbs can be helpful, right? Without diet, I think diet is number one. And then number two is supporting the body. Number three is treating. And yes, those herbs can be helpful, but if you really want to recover, they're not going to treat the parasites in the central nervous system. They're not going to treat the larger worms. And that's a problem. So we've had students that we've got really a good recipe. You can find it online, Brenda's deworming recipe. That's just one. There's lots of good ones. You can buy blends of herbs and you'll pass parasites, but you'll still have the multiple sclerosis. You will start to feel better, but you'll still have the MS. And when our students switch from just using herbs to also incorporating the parasite drugs, this is where we've seen, even the last week or two, I have from my students, they have these paper plates and they lay the worms on that they're passing. And they're just like, some of them are like 1.5 to 2 feet long. It's just shock, and many of them, like it's really, really shocking. So if we have parasites in the central nervous system, the herbs are not going to be strong enough on their own. And some of them can lay 200,000 eggs in a day. So this is why it really depends on what our goal is. If we want to be like, get the most recovery that we can which for some of us will be full recovery, a lot of us it will be, then we have to treat more effectively, and that includes using, again, parasite drugs, herbs, and oxygen therapies. See if there's any last couple of questions here. Hi, Ahmed. I am following the diet from the Academy. How long does it take for symptom improvements, and when should I start treating? So you will, like, if your carbs are low enough, then, and you're, let's say, sleeping at least 8 hours per night and you're having daily bowel movements, you will, and you don't have a lot of mold in your environment, you can notice symptom improvements in 1 to 2 weeks. And that's if your carbs are low enough. So if your carbs are, let's say, around 50 total grams of carbs, or between 50 and 60, you may not notice a lot of symptom improvements. But when you get them down, the total grams of carbs down to around 30 total grams of carbs, that's where you'll notice a lot more symptom improvement. You're so very welcome. Patty, that's great. You're so welcome. Tanya, only if it was for people that have HIV. So what I think that, Tanya, that I think you've commented last week also on the live event that I did. And all I can share with you is for people that do have chronic, like hepatitis, etc., that when you restore your microbiome, balance to your microbiome, and do all these steps, very often people notice that those viruses are quiet, they're dormant, and they don't have the symptoms. So really important to follow these steps. Hello, Ricky. The addition of stevia is to kill the spirochete. So stevia is a biofilm buster. It is not going to kill stevia. Or I have not seen any research that it does kill spirochetes. It could, but I have not seen any research on that. And we do avoid stevia because our students want to get rid of their sweet tooth so that they are not tempted once they're well, because if they go back to having sweet things, then that is going to promote parasites in their body again, because sugar is the favorite food. And I know stevia will not feed, but sometimes stevia is contaminated with sucrose and other sugars. And again, if you have that sweet tooth, you're going to be tempted. So we avoid all sweeteners in the recovery phase. And I don't have stevia. I don't have sugar. I don't want it. The sweetest thing I'll have is like some vine ripened fruit in the summertime. And I like that, but I definitely don't. And as far as, working on biofilms, like Cistus tea is really helpful for that. And then our oxygen therapy that I can't talk about here, which you can find on livediseasefree.com. If you do a Google search of livediseasefree.com and oxygen therapies for treating parasites, you'll learn about that there. All right. I'm so happy that you're doing a lot better. Ricky, that's awesome. Thank you for your kind words, Jennifer. Hi, Patty. See, last couple of questions. Mona, I am down to less than 30 total grams of carbs. Can you state what the parasite drugs are again, please? So Mona, when you treat parasites, you have to work with a practitioner, all right? Because number one, there's not a cookie cutter approach. If you have roundworms, you need different parasite drugs than if you have tapeworms, or if you have flukes, or if you have protist infections. So like babesia, malaria is really common with MS. Roundworms are really common, but sometimes the roundworms are like 3-foot roundworms. Sometimes they're little filarial worms that are in the central nervous system that Dr. Alan McDonald found. For myself, intestinal flukes were a big problem. They require a totally different, they cause a lot of inflammation in the body, and that would be a different drug. There's blood flukes also. So flukes can be like little ones in your blood. They can be in your liver. A liver fluke is a different one. This is fairly complicated. And if you just like go on forums and you're like, oh, I found this one drug and I could just try it once a day, like you can make the parasites resistant. So the best option is to follow the Live Disease Free plan. Stop feeding the parasites so much, follow the diet, support the body. And then you have to work with a practitioner to be energy tested to see which parasite drugs test well for you. Some common parasite drugs, so albendazole, will treat more systemically and it treats roundworms. Mebendazole is another one, and that one will work more in the gut. But albendazole also will treat some tapeworms. And then there's pyrantel palmitoate, which is sometimes called combantrin. So those are all kind of roundworm medications, except for, again, albendazole can treat some tapeworms and even the immature. And again, there's another issue with, some of the parasite drugs will cross the blood-brain barrier, some won't. Some will treat the larva, some will treat the adult. So, and you want to use an effective dose, or else you're going to make the parasites resistant to the drug, and then they're not going to help you. And then there's other drugs like Alinea, which is a little bit more broad spectrum, and it will treat some of the parasites that cause diarrhea. It will treat some tapeworms and some roundworms. And then there is praziquantel, which is more for the flatworms, the tapeworms and the flukes. And then there's other drugs that will kind of treat more of the liver flukes, more blood flukes. There's niclosamide, which also will treat, I think, more of the immature forms of the flukes or the tapeworms. So there's probably like 10 at least. There's fenbendazole, there's thiabendazole, there's a lot of different parasite drugs. And so an ivermectin will also treat some different types of parasites. So there's tinidazole and Alinea, which will treat more of the protists, some of the protists. So that's why there's not a cookie cutter approach, and it's not wise to just take a parasite drug, because what people are taking that I hear from, they're taking very, very small amounts, and it's just making the parasite so that they're like, it doesn't bother me anymore. You've done this for a while and I'm just resistant to it. And then that drug isn't going to work for you in the future. So that's why it's really important that you either work with a doctor or a practitioner. And if you don't have one, you can reach out to us and we will help you to access everything that you need, practitioners, treatments, etc. You want to have an effective treatment plan. And once you know this skill, when you've used it and you understand how to use the parasite drugs, then it can be kind of simple down after, because once you're well, you will definitely want to treat yourself at least once or twice a year, because just like we do with our pets. But then it becomes quite simple because you know how they work, you understand the dosages, and this is part of the skill of becoming a wellness champion, becoming the director of your health, really taking that active role and charge in your health. And when you learn all of this while following a holistic approach, then you'll find you hardly ever need to see a practitioner. Maybe once every few years you want to get blood work done just to see where you're at. But if you feel well, like, why bother, right? And you're not going to need a ton of supplements, because supplements are not the reason. For the vast majority of us, it's not the reason why we're feeling terrible. Yes, we could be deficient in iron, we could have low thyroid, we could be low in vitamin B12 or vitamin D for sure. Yes, we could, especially when we have the parasites. But all of these supplements we're taking, the hundreds of dollars we're spending per month, most of it is not necessary. We may need to build things up short term, one or two areas, but we don't need the 5 or 10 or 15 supplements that we're taking. Okay, last couple of questions here. So yes, so stevia could be helpful with biofilms, but we don't recommend it because there's other things that will break up biofilms way better, and then we get rid of our sweet tooth. What do you recommend for mold exposure? So there's a combination of things. Number one, we have to definitely deal with the mold in our environment, and watch the documentary called Moldy. It really helps you to understand how these mold spores, they'll get on your walls, in your carpet, in your drapes, on your clothing. So it's quite something to get the mold spores down, not just getting rid of the moldy drywall and wood, etc. So dealing with the mold, getting it dealt with really, really well. And then the next thing would be to take binders. So chlorella really has a high affinity for mycotoxins. So Chlorella vulgaris will be, actually Chlorella pyridosa will be a stronger binder than Chlorella vulgaris. Vulgaris would be more for people that are sensitive to chlorella, which isn't very many people. So chlorella is an amazing binder of mycotoxins. So that would be helpful. You could also use a safe zeolite. The only one that I'm aware of that I would recommend is Zeobind from biopureus.com. You can find it there, Zeobind. So that also will help to bind. Dr. Klinghardt feels that it works as well as cholestyramine, which is a drug that will help bind different biotoxins like mold toxins. And so number one, definitely cleaning up the environment. Number two, using binders, and then also using different therapies. And so there are antifungal drugs that will treat more mold. And then there are other antifungal drugs that will treat more yeast. So you want to definitely treat if you have mold inside of you. You want to be like using binders for the mycotoxins they produce, and you want to clean that up in your environment. And then things like, taking back, like as you're feeling better, and just remember that mold exposure will make us sick, and it will make us our immune system more weak, so that we're more susceptible to other parasites. But we haven't found any of our students that just have mold or just have candida. I know when I was first diagnosed with MS, there were a lot of books written about, candida causing MS and candida causing all kinds of diseases. It's associated with diseases, but the other parasites create a toxic environment where mold will grow and candida will grow. So we have to also treat the other parasites, or else we'll never clear the mold. So we do want to treat the bigger worms, the protists and the different bacteria, etc. Building back the good microbes, sweating, like all those other integrative, taking back your mobility, all of those other things are really important also. Sunshine. Fungus hates dry heat and sunshine. All right. And a couple more questions. Are any coconut products allowed, such as coconut milk, cream? No, we would avoid all of that. Coconut oil is fine. The parasites don't really like it as much. I'm so glad that you find that my video is helpful. How do I know what parasites I have? My GP doesn't check for that. They don't have good tests, Mona. So instead of trying to figure out which parasites you have, what we do is we look to see what parasite treatments you energy test well for. So they will hold a sample or one dose of each parasite herb and or drug in your energy field, and they'll be able to tell whether it balances you, whether it strengthens you. And then they'll say, yes, this one's good, or no, that one's not helpful, this one's helpful. And then our students will bring the list to us, and then we'll help them to build a game plan. And usually our students test well for 3 to 5 parasite drugs, but they don't take them all at the same time at the start. Eventually they do. Parasites love sugar in the body. When they try stevia, I haven't seen the research on that they would die, Ricky. I know that biofilms definitely. There is, trying to think, there's a bacteria that I don't think it's stevia. I think it's something else that they would put in gum, xylitol. And that apparently helps to kill bacteria in your mouth. But stevia, I haven't seen anything. And I've studied under so many doctors, I haven't heard anything about that they die. Where do I find a doctor to work with me, Mona? That's a really good question. I don't know. It's hard. Like you can visit their website, you can see the services they provide, you can email their office, but the vast majority of practitioners, they do not have the skill, and they'll say, why do you think you have parasites? And they don't have the skill to identify or to test for them. So Deb, if stool tests don't diagnose parasites, how do we determine which parasites we have? So we look at our health history, we look at the health history of our parents, we look at our symptoms, because there are very specific symptoms for worms and for fungus and for Lyme infections, etc. We also look at our diagnoses, so what we've been diagnosed with, and then we also look and consider our energy test results. So those are the 5 criteria right now that we use that our students, it'll help them to build a game plan. We would not recommend any kind of, like even with marijuana or any mushrooms, etc., because a lot of those things, like they might give you some temporary relief, but they really affect our brain function long term. And I know with marijuana that's really linked with higher incidence of different psychoses. So we want a healthy brain, so we don't recommend any hallucinogenic herbs and or mushrooms at all. We want to really protect our brain and heal our brain because of all the insults that it's had from all the toxins. Okay, last question. Cholestyramine does not cure mold illness. It helps to bind the toxins from mold. And yes, Dr. Richie or Mark Shoemaker, I thought it was Richie Shoemaker, is he's a resource. So it's not Mark, it's Richie Shoemaker, but he is a great resource. And chlorella is incredibly helpful for binding, but the zeobind would be stronger. And some people don't want to use pharmaceuticals if they don't have to, so that's where the zeobind would be more helpful. So if this is the first time that you found me and you're like, what, parasites like causing MS? Yes, parasites do cause multiple sclerosis, but all other chronic diseases also. So if this is new to you, make sure to check out, you can find us on Live Disease Free on YouTube and on Facebook, but if you go to our website, livediseasefree.com, you'll see our blog. And the blog is great because you'll see specific topics. You'll see my notes. You'll be able to find like my condensed notes, condensed videos, and you'll just have, it's a wealth of information there that really helps you to understand what you're dealing with. And then if you get to the place where you're like, I got it. I finally got it. I finally found my answer. I believe, I know in my heart that I'm dealing with parasites. If you need support, because maybe you don't have a practitioner that'll help you, we can help you in the Live Disease Free plan. It is a proven plan. Make sure to listen to some of the amazing successes of our students that have graduated, that have recovered. Years and years later, they're still recovered. It's absolutely amazing. You'll have tears of joy listening to their stories. So make sure to check out their successes and watch my masterclass, which talks a lot more in detail about the steps we take to recover. If you need help, you can reach out by filling out the form, booking a time to chat with me to make sure that the Live Disease Free plan is a good fit for you. And then you can start to be a wellness champion right away. We just had 2 people join today, and I'm super excited to meet with them and super excited to get to know a little bit about their health history and get them off to a very strong start. So with that, I'm going to let you guys go. I hope you have a wonderful week, and we will talk to you next week. Take care and bye-bye for now.